And before I begin my remarks, I would want to recognize and welcome one of our colleagues from the great state of Ohio, Congressman Brad Winstrup. It is my understanding that you will also be testifying before the committee on our Member Day, given your interest in some of the issues we're going to have before the committee today. You would certainly be welcome to. This afternoon, the subcommittee will receive testimony on the Defense Health Program and Military Health System. We welcome 6 witnesses. If I could, in the order of introduction, that would also then, in the interest of time, since we have 6 on the panel, be the order of speaking, if we could, as far as your testimony. First of all, Mr. Thomas McCaffrey, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. Vice Admiral Rachel Bono, Director of Defense Health Agency. Lieutenant General Naja Y. West, General, Surgeon General of the Army. Vice Admiral Forrest C. Phelan, Surgeon General of the Navy. Lieutenant General Dorothy A. Hogg, Surgeon General of the Air Force. And Ms. Stacy Cummings, Program Executive Officer, Defense Health Management Systems, and Ms. Cummings. This will be the last time you're before the subcommittee, as I understand it. We wish you well in your new position in the Office of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. Good luck on that one. Having a panel of 6 witnesses is unusual for our hearings. However, each of you has a unique vantage point and responsibility in implementing the significant reorganization that is underway within the Department of Defense's health enterprise. We intend to have a look at how these changes are impacting the spectrum of military health system, from medical readiness to beneficiary care, and how those changes are reflected in the fiscal year 2020 budget submission. I'm particularly interested in the update on the defense health budget as it relates to the reductions in services medical corps, what the future of care looks like for our service members and their families, and an update on electronic health medical records system genesis. We look forward to hearing about each of these topics and more. With that, I again thank you for appearing before the committee today, but would first recognize my friend, Mr. Calvert, for any opening comments he has.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to welcome all our witnesses today, and I'll keep my statement brief so we have a chance to hear from all of you. I'm looking forward to learning from you about the provision of health care that will change in order to address the threats from near-peer adversaries. How will a fight with China or Russia stress our military health system, and are we prepared? These are large countries with lots of territory, much different from our current engagements in the Middle East. How are we taking advantage of technology to extend the time when critical care must be provided in the moments following injury? I think this is an important hearing. If we are facing threats that have the potential to inflict harm on our service members at levels not seen in many years, we need to be fully cognizant of what you are doing and how you're positioning the military health system to address these threats. Do we have the capacity to respond with appropriate levels of evacuation and medical care if one of our carriers is hit? An issue that has been critical importance to this subcommittee many years, the development and fielding of electronic medical files that will allow you to share medical data with the Veterans Administration. We all look forward to hearing about your progress to date on this effort. We need to be able to field a system that is flexible and able to keep up with the demands of younger workforce and customer base that are used continued technological enhancements. Again, many important topics to get to today. Thank you again for each of our witnesses. We appreciate your service to this country. I look forward to your testimony. And with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Would like to now recognize Ms. Granger, our former chair and ranking member on the full committee, for a statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Visklosky and Ranking Member Calvert. And thank each of you for what you're doing. And this is a very important issue. You each have important roles in ensuring that our service members and their families have the very best medical care. And this committee is monitoring changes in the delivery of health care, both on the battlefield and back home. I know that our troops are operating in changing environments. I'd like to hear you address that and what's changing in the way we're delivering health care. But also, I was briefed this week on two issues that I want to make sure that our dollars are being spent. Some very specific concerns that related to defense medical research. Two, Alzheimer's and pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer, if you compare that, for instance, to breast cancer, the dollars that are going to research on that cancer are not nearly as much, and the alarm is very high because more and more are being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and because it's almost no symptoms, usually the first time they hear about it, they also hear how many months they have to live, and so I'd like you to look at that and understand also the high incidence in the African American community. The other is Alzheimer's disease, and there was good news in one way. I was briefed on that this week, and with Alzheimer's, the research is showing there's some really things that we can do in our life, how we live our life, what we eat, whether we exercise, that sort of thing. But the money to get that message out is really important because it could make a difference. I say that's the good news because we know what we're dealing with, but we're also dealing with it at much younger ages. I had a woman that was diagnosed at age 37 in her family, and so I'd like to hear what we're doing at that and what the statistics and how we can improve that. I want to again thank you so much for what you're doing, and it's very important to us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For each witness, your full testimony will be placed in the record, and members have a copy at their seats. In the interest of time, it is my understanding that people will limit their remarks as far as opening statements to about 3 minutes. And Mr. McCaffrey, we'll start with you, please.
Thank you, Chairman Visklosky and Ranking Member Calvert and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to present our medical program funding request for fiscal year 2020. We are honored to represent the dedicated military and civilian medical professionals in the military health system, providing direct support to our combatant commands and delivering or arranging care for over 9 million beneficiaries who rely on us for medical care. This budget supports numerous reforms to the military health system that were enacted under the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. These reforms, taken together, represent the most sweeping changes to military medicine in over 3 decades. The overarching direction from Congress was to consolidate and standardize many military healthcare functions in a way that better integrates medical readiness and health delivery throughout the department. Included among these reforms, the transition of responsibility for the administration and management of our medical military treatment facilities from the services to the Defense Health Agency. It includes implementation and standardization of enterprise-wide activities and the assessment and restructuring of medical strengths and infrastructure in the military health system to maintain core competencies of our healthcare providers. This last item called for the military departments, the joint staff, and organizations within the Office of the Secretary to assess the operational medical requirements needed to support the National Defense Strategy. The military departments identified the personnel and skill sets they need to support our combatant commanders' operational needs. As a result of this assessment, the department intends to reduce overall uniform medical positions over a phased period of time. This proposed reshaping will focus on ensuring the military department medical forces are best structured to meet operational requirements. In those cases where strength is in excess of operational requirements, the budget will be repurposed to other military department priorities. We remain committed to sustaining the superb battlefield medical care we have provided to our warfighters and the world-class treatment and rehabilitation for those who bear the wounds of past military conflicts. Our proposed FY 2020 budget sustains the medical research and development portfolio and includes our continued commitment to maintain our management infrastructure that has managed the congressionally directed research program for these past many years. Our budget for military medicine represents a balanced, comprehensive strategy that aligns with the Secretary's priorities in congressional direction. I look forward to your questions, and I want to thank you for inviting us here today to speak with you about the essential linkage between readiness and health and our plans to further improve our health system in support of the National Defense Strategy. Thank you.
Chairman Visklosky, Ranking Member Calvert, and members of the subcommittee, Thank you for this opportunity to share the work of the Defense Health Agency in support of our combatant commands and the military departments. I will briefly build on Mr. McCaffrey's statement and provide insight into the work of the DHA to execute our responsibilities under this proposed budget. As Mr. McCaffrey noted, both Congress and the Secretary of Defense's guidance was clear: to pursue efficiencies and create value for the department by consolidating and standardizing military health care functions to support an integrated system of readiness and health. The DHA is honored and privileged to facilitate that integration. We are a strategic enabler to the department in supporting the readiness needs of our combatant commanders and the military departments. Through our management of enterprise activities, the DHA is positioned to reduce unwarranted variation and costs in both clinical and administrative functions. On October 1st, 2019, all military facilities in the eastern region of the United States will transition to the Defense Health Agency for administration and management, placing over 50% of facilities, admissions, and enrollees under the DHA. Support for medical logistics, health facilities, and acquisition will be fully managed for MTFs in the military health system by the DHA. We will also be preparing for the transition of the remaining facilities in the continental United States and Alaska on October 1st, 2020. With regards to the proposed military medical manpower reductions, the military departments and DHA are working closely together to ensure that access to care and availability of health services will be consistently maintained for all of our beneficiaries. As needed, alternative staffing models, contracts, military-civilian partnerships, and existing TRICARE networks will be utilized to best meet the needs of our patients. We will continue to meet all standards for timely access for our beneficiaries, and while care delivery locations may change, our commitment to provide our patients with high-quality health care that they deserve will remain steadfast. I am particularly proud of how we have standardized our performance management system, providing all levels of the military with our performance measures in readiness, health, access, quality, safety, and cost. Our dashboards can be viewed at an enterprise level by service, by market, and by individual hospitals and clinics. These dashboards help us assess performance and identify where we need to invest resources, training, or management in order to achieve further improvement. Along with Mr. McCaffrey, I look forward to working with you over the coming months, and I welcome any questions you may have about our plans, performance, and vision for the future. Thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wisłowski, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's my pleasure to address this committee a final time as the 44th Army Surgeon General and Commanding General of the U.S. Army Medical Command. It's been my honor to serve with and lead our talented and dedicated soldiers and Army civilians for more than 30 years. On behalf of my soldiers, their families, and Army civilians, I would like to sincerely thank you for your unwavering support. I would also like to thank my colleagues in our sister services, my fellow Surgeons General, the Defense Health Agency, and team here, and it's been an honor to serve with each of you with the military medicine team. Today, I'm proud to tell you with the utmost confidence that Army's commitment to its medical mission and to our people remains steadfast. We are poised to deliver timely health services in the operational environment and comprehensive care at home stations, and to remain on the cutting edge of medical research, development, and fielding, which are the key components of a continuum of care that provides for forces that are medically ready and enhances the readiness of our Army's medical forces in any environment that we might be asked to operate in the multi-domain joint environment that we're anticipating in the future. America's Army stands ready today to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars. As our chief continually emphasizes, readiness is number one, and there is no other number one. As a key component of the Joint Health Services enterprise and a deployable Army, Army Medicine is ready to provide capability across unified land operations. We support combatant commanders across the globe and in 10 named contingency operations, various exercises, and the security cooperation activities. Army readiness begins with fit and healthy fighting force, and medical issues currently account for approximately 3.7% of soldier non-deployability, which is a marked improvement in the last 24 months. I'm confident that we will continue to trend in the right direction, as evidenced by the increased readiness in our brigade combat teams. The Army has made strides in improving mental resilience. 61 embedded behavioral health teams support our operational units throughout the Army. In FY19, we dedicated approximately $455 million to support various behavioral health initiatives. Army's implementation of the Holistic Health and Fitness Program in our combat formations has increased readiness. The addition of physical therapists, strength trainers, and dietitians to units is improving the Army's culture of fitness. Army Medicine is extremely proud of our high-quality medical education and training as well. Annually, we train over 1,500 physicians in our facilities. Our first-time medical board certification rate of approximately 92% well exceeds the national average of 86%, meaning that we have well-trained medical professionals to support our Army in any environment. The Army Medical Department Center and School in San Antonio trains more than 31,000 U.S. students and 330 international students annually in diverse programs dedicated to, again, readiness. Army Medicine has continually evolved to meet global threats to improve the battlefield survivability rate over the years. Our researchers have focused on traumatic brain injury, behavioral health, combat casualty care, military operational medicine, military infectious diseases and countermeasures, radiation health effects, clinical and rehabilitative medicine, health services, global health engagements, and medical training systems and health informatics. Again, all to support the warfighter in the various operational environments that we might find ourselves in. We have made great advances, such as peripheral nerve growth following amputation and living anti-infective human skin substitute. Most notably, in 2018, the Food and Drug Administration approved the first ever blood test for traumatic brain injury. Continued generous funding from Congress has made the steady advancement of military medicine possible. And finally, in keeping with congressional intent, Army Medicine supports and has committed resources towards reforming the military health system. We will divest responsibilities of the administration and management of all military facilities to the DHA, as you heard my colleague Admiral Bono mentioned, in a phased approach which began in 1 October 2018 for the Army with the transfer of Womack Army Medical Center at Fort Bragg to the Defense Health Agency. We are committed to ensuring that the transition is transparent to our soldiers, families, and retirees, because again, we are all one team, and we need to make sure that that mission is a no-fail mission. In closing, our Army has relied on Army Medicine to conserve the fighting strength since 1775. The lethality of our Army is derived from our soldiers, who are strengthened by their families, and we must take care of them. We will continue to respond to our nation's call with premier medical professionals providing high-quality care. And I appreciate the subcommittee's work and your continued support to our soldiers, to Army Medicine, and the Army. And it's been my honor to serve with you. And thank you again, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Chairman Wisłowski, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's my honor and privilege to be with you here today. My message this morning is simple and straightforward. The operational tempo and global commitments of America's Navy and Marine Corps remains high. Sailors and Marines are deployed and operating around the world today. The Navy Medicine Team is with them, working tirelessly to protect their health and preserve their readiness. On behalf of these dedicated men and women, thank you for your continued support and confidence. My written statement provides you more details, but I want to highlight for you today 3 key areas: readiness, transformation, and our people. We have no greater responsibility than providing medical forces that are ready, prepared, and present to save lives of those who sacrifice and serve to defend our freedom. Every sailor, Marine, and their families are depending on us to do all in our power to provide them the best care our nation can offer, and one day return them home safely and alive. To honor this trust, we are continuing to develop new and improved capabilities to support the full range of operations today. These efforts are critical since we know that disaggregated operations pose unique challenges to timely access to life-saving resuscitation and surgery. Integral to advancing our expeditionary combat casualty care capabilities is ensuring that our medical personnel sustain their clinical readiness skills. We are making solid progress implementing our Navy Medicine Trauma Strategy. In July of 2018, our Naval Medical Center at Camp Lejeune was designated as a Level 3 Trauma Center by the American College of Surgeons. Now, our staff there are now gaining valuable trauma experience while also providing an incredibly important service to the local community. We expanded our successful hospital corpsman trauma training course and partnerships to Stroger Hospital in Cook County in Chicago, as well as the University of Florida Medical Center in Jacksonville. And we continue to send staff to LA County where they get invaluable trauma experience to prepare them for the next conflict. Bottom line, these efforts are preparing us well for the next fight. Reform efforts continue within the military health system. The Department of the Navy is in full support of these, including the transfer of administration and management of our military treatment facilities to the Defense Health Agency. This legislation has reshaped military medicine to best support the warfighter while improving the healthcare delivery system with greater standardization and consistency. Our leadership recognizes that both the services and DHA must be successful in executing their responsibilities. For us, this transition represents a unique opportunity to laser focus exclusively on the readiness of sailors and Marines. This is especially critical as we return to competition between great powers and the reality that future conflicts will present challenges to combat casualty care and survival that we have not seen in the recent past. These reforms are allowing us to establish our organizational constructs to support readiness requirements while sustaining our critical responsibilities to man, train, and equip our forces. A key component moving forward will be to ensure that Navy medicine is resourced to meet our services, Navy and Marine Corps, authorities, responsibilities, and critically important missions. Nothing is more critical to our mission readiness than the Navy medicine team. Dedicated and talented men and women serving around the world today. A key priority for us is our human capital strategy, both our military and civilian shipmates, to ensure that we have the proper mix of professionals that are trained, organized, and equipped to execute their responsibilities whenever and wherever called. This focus requires an emphasis on talent management at all levels, as well as recruiting and retaining the best and brightest. Navy Medicine is grateful for your support and of our resource requirements to do this and to meet our accession and retention activities and goals, particularly for many of our critical wartime specialties. In closing, our commitment to you is that we will never waver from our obligation and the trust placed in our hands to be ready to save the lives of those placed in our care. I am proud of the Navy Medicine team beyond words and remain appreciative of your strong support. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Visklosky, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. The Air Force Medical Service is in a period of great change, driven by numerous factors. Throughout these transformations, our commitment to our patients that we care for and our medical readiness mission has never been stronger. Today's Air Force operates the most effective patient movement system ever. We bring wounded service members home in record time, deliver critical care at 30,000 feet, and push life-saving care farther forward than ever before. Multiple efforts are underway to further improve our patient movement capabilities to better position us to execute the National Defense Strategy. We will increase our critical care air transport teams based on the Air Medical Readiness Analysis Study. These team of doctors, nurses, and technicians turn aircraft into flying intensive care units that provide life-sustaining care while moving patients hundreds and even thousands of miles. We continue developing our ground surgical teams, our primary battlefield surgical unit, for deployment to austere locations. We are also looking at our other deployment platforms to prepare and modernize them for what may be our next conflict, as well as ways to make them lighter and leaner and more tailorable to current and future combatant commanders' requirements. We continue to collaborate with the Defense Health Agency in moving authority, direction, and control of the military treatment facilities. On October 1st, 2018, the Air Force transferred 4 military treatment facilities to the Defense Health Agency. And like any enterprise transformation, we have identified gaps in our current planning process, and we are working collaboratively to resolve these to improve the transition for subsequent military treatment facilities. In addition to the military health system transformation, the Air Force Medical Service will also transform itself to refocus on operational medical readiness. We will stand down 2 field operating agencies and stand up a single agency called the Air Force Medical Readiness Agency. This will eliminate redundancies and right-size my headquarters' medical capabilities to focus on medically ready airmen and ready medics who are current and competent to do their missions. We are also restructuring our medical squadrons. The Healthcare Operations Squadron will focus on providing beneficiary care without the distractions of military medical requirements, such as periodic health assessments and waiver requirements. The Operational Medical Readiness Squadron will focus on active duty airmen's mission capabilities. This new structure optimizes both functions and allows us to return airmen to full mission capability as quickly as possible without decrementing care to our beneficiaries. As Robin Sharma once said, change is hardest in the beginning, messiest in the middle, and easiest at the end. The military health system is in the middle of this change. These challenges create opportunities to shape the future and to think without a box. Air Force medics are first and foremost warrior medics. As the Air Force Surgeon General, I'm committed to achieving full-spectrum medical readiness, developing joint medical leaders, and driving the Air Force Medical Service transformation to increase our agility and life-saving capabilities required to execute the National Defense Strategy. Thank you for your support of Air Force medicine and the opportunity to address you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Visklosky, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I am honored to represent the Department of Defense as the former Program Executive Officer, Defense Healthcare Management Systems, PEO-DHMS. The mission of PEO-DHMS is to transform the delivery of healthcare and advance data sharing through a modernized electronic health record for service members, veterans, and their families. In 2015, the DoD awarded a contract to the Leidos Partnership for Defense Health to deliver a modern, interoperable EHR, MHS Genesis. MHS Genesis provides an integrated inpatient and outpatient state-of-the-market commercial solution consisting of Cerner Millennium, an industry-leading EHR, and Henry Schein's Dentrix Enterprise, a best-of-breed dental module. In 2017, the DoD deployed MHS Genesis to 4 pilot sites in Washington state. The deployment to these pilot sites allowed DoD to better understand technical, configuration, and adoption challenges that are typical in an EHR deployment. Today, those 4 pilot sites are using MHS Genesis to safely deliver, manage, and document healthcare, completing over 100,000 patient encounters each month. In December of 2018, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition, in coordination with the MHS leadership, approved further deployment of MHS Genesis to the next 6 waves beginning later this year. MHS Genesis deployment will follow a regional wave model, a total of 23 waves across 3 regions in the United States and 2 overseas. This approach allows the DoD to take full advantage of lessons learned and experience gained to maximize efficiencies in our subsequent waves. As we work towards fully deploying MHS Genesis across the DoD, we recognize the benefit of expanding our federal partnerships. In 2018, the United States Coast Guard joined the DoD program, and the Department of Veterans Affairs awarded a contract to acquire, deploy, and adopt the same EHR as DoD. The result of these decisions will be a single integrated EHR for all service members, veterans, and their families, fundamentally eliminating the need to exchange data between the departments. As the granddaughter, daughter, and spouse of veterans, and a beneficiary of the military health system myself, I can confidently say that PEO-DHMS is equally committed to the successful deployment of a modern EHR, not just to the DoD, but to the Coast Guard and the VA. In closing, I would like to introduce and welcome the new PEO-DHMS, Mr. Bill Tinston, who's with me today. Mr. Tinston joins us from the Defense Logistics Agency, where he served as the Program Executive Officer. He brings extensive executive-level experience in information technology, program management, and cybersecurity. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our progress, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Would the person introduced mind identifying themselves? Thank you very much. We'll turn to questions, and I would just suggest to the members, because of the number of people on the panel, to please direct a question at a specific witness or 2. Additionally, we obviously would like fulsome but concise answers. I wouldn't feel the impulse to jump in unless there is some new information or a nuance we would miss in the original answer, so we can continue to move on. With that, I would recognize Ms. Lowy for any opening statement she has, as well as any questions she has.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm sorry there are so many hearings going on today that I did not want to be late, but I couldn't help it. Thank you very much. I really do want to thank Chairman Visclosky, Ranking Member Calvert, for holding this very important hearing, and I welcome each of the service Surgeons Generals, Mr. McCaffrey, Vice Admiral Bono, and Ms. Cummings. I do strongly believe that our military health system is world-class. It contributes to groundbreaking research, benefiting both warfighters and the country they defend. It is critical to maintaining the highest levels of readiness and capability of the force. It also requires robust resources to ensure service members, retirees, and families receive the care they deserve. This is a commitment we must never fail, and I thank you all for your service. Now, I think I saw Mr. Rogers, my friend, down there. And Mr. Rogers and I and several members of the committee, Ms. Granger, have been working on a coordinated health system, as we know, with our records. For how many years, Mr. Rogers? The billions of dollars we spend on this has caused a great deal of concern, which is the understatement from many members of this committee as we watch the money increase. Now, Ms. Cummings, you did touch on this system. Our expectation for electronic health record modernization is a system that is interoperable between DOD and the VA. And last September, former Secretary of Defense Mattis and VA Secretary Wilkie signed a joint statement to collaborate on implementation. In that statement, a commitment was made for an accountability mechanism to coordinate decision-making and oversight. I just asked because I couldn't believe my numbers was right, and I just asked someone to confirm. To date, $4.9 billion has been spent on this effort. You're aware of that, I assume. $4.9 billion has been spent on this effort. Can you just describe more clearly what mechanisms are in place to collaborate with the VA? What implementation challenges do you foresee? What resources do you need? Will you finally get this done, or are you going to come up with another excuse next year? $4.9 billion has been spent to date. If I sound agitated, if some of my other colleagues sound agitated about this, we've been working on this for a very long time, and it seems to me we've run out of excuses. So tell me what's happening. When will it be completed? When will the VA and the military records truly be interoperable?
So thank you for that question. And I've been the PEO for the last 3 years, but I have had a great opportunity to work very closely with the VA, and a lot of the teammates who are right now deploying the DoD's electronic health record were part of the IEHR program. And I will say that while I do agree that we spent money between the DoD and VA that got us to a place where we ended up going our separate ways, that money, I do not consider it wasted, because we got a lot of benefit out of that got us to where we are today. And what I will say about what's different about where we are today than where we were 4 and 5 years ago is that both the DoD and VA have a contract. We are resourced through on the DoD side through our POM and through our POM submission, and the VA is resourced through their budget mechanisms. And the commitment has never been greater, according to the history that I've talked to the people in my office, at the senior leadership level between DOD and VA that the commitment has never been greater to work together. So I can say that I have great confidence that as we deploy MHS Genesis in the DOD, the VA will be demonstrating their capability that is not, I won't use the word interoperable with the DOD because it is integrated with the DOD. For the first time, we're going to have the service members' data center, and the provider, whether they are a military provider or a VA provider, will be looking at exactly the same data. We won't have to pick it up and move it from one department to the other. So I am confident that we are going to accomplish that. The DoD timeline for full deployment is the end of calendar year 2023. The VA is on a 10-year deployment schedule to get across the entire VA hospital capability in the United States, which is in, I think, in the 600 hospital clinic range. But we are working together. We are working together, I think, more closely than we ever have in the past.
Last time I checked, this was 2019.
It is.
So the system now is not interoperable? And it sounds to me you still have one system, they have another, but you're going to work together? I don't understand that. If a Mr. Jones is a veteran, and he was in the military before, he still doesn't have one record according to where you are now?
So currently in our DoD legacy and VA legacy systems, the way that we share data is through a tool called the Joint Legacy Viewer. That is interoperable in that the data can be viewed. What I'm talking about in the future as an integrated system is that we don't have to move data or view data. It's actually there when you go to perform whatever medical
Why isn't it
need
there
that you
now?
have.
It's going to take 4 more years to get to that point?
We have the capability that is fielded centrally in a technical data center, but every single clinic and hospital needs to have a unique deployment. That is in following the commercial model. So as we go live in a region, we will have an integrated solution in that region. So we're live in the Pacific Northwest. The VA will go live in the Pacific Northwest, and we'll have an integrated system. And so we're going to deploy in a way that we're deploying in the same locations at the same time. So we will have local and then regional and then national interoperability. So we're going to start smaller and we're going to work our way up to the entire enterprise.
I'm going to turn this over, but just to clarify, Mr. Smith served his country with distinction. He becomes a veteran. And today, there is not one record. It's all coordinated.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That is correct. There is not one record
why?
today.
I know I have the indulgence of the chair, but many of us have been working on this for a long time, so I apologize.
Sure, I
Maybe
understand.
you can explain why?
Sure. So the DoD and the VA each built their own homegrown systems decades ago. So the DoD system of Alta was built in 2004. The VA built their system Vista years and years ago. In fact, they were among the first electronic health records. And so because we each had our own homegrown systems, the way that we found to share data was through an interface called the Joint Legacy Viewer instead of putting all the data in one place. Now that we've shifted strategies and both the DoD and VA are going to have the same system, we will have an integrated solution, but as you've pointed out, we do have a deployment schedule that for the DoD is scheduled to be complete around the world by 2023.
I'll turn this back to the chair, but we'd like to remind you that you've already spent $4.9 billion, and you're still working on an integrated system. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate the gentlewoman for raising the issue and given his deep concern in long years of work would now recognize Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the courtesy. And I appreciate Ms. Lowy bringing this topic up, something we've been working on for years and years. It came to my attention 15 years ago or whatever. The VFW brought a young soldier retiree from my district in to see me up here. He had been injured in Iraq, IED. It destroyed one eye. He was taken to the hospital in Germany, operated on. and they saved the other eye. It was impacted but not blind. So when he came home and resumed his life in my district, soon this injured eye began to deteriorate. So he goes to the VA hospital in Lexington because of that. They could not operate on this eye to save it. Why? Because they could not get the DOD records from Germany into the VA hospital in Lexington. So they were afraid to operate, not knowing what they were getting into, what had been done for him in Germany. And so he goes blind and comes to see me. That was my first introduction to this problem. And I was absolutely flabbergasted that the bureaucracies in DOD and VA were so intent on keeping their system in their hands and not sharing with anyone else, both sides. This young man went blind. And I'm sure there's hundreds, thousands of instances like this. We've appropriated funds, we've preached, we've hammered, we have requested, we've met. Over the years, I've met with the secretaries of all these departments, including the Attorney General, over the years, all the way back yonder. And we get this bureaucratic double talk. I've tried to follow what you're doing over the years. And I thought we were headed toward a solution, and then all of a sudden you switch lanes and try something else, and we're stuck with the same problem we've had all the time. I can't be very objective about this because I'm so involved with it. And you have stalled, and you've given us all sorts of double talk. And I want to know, if that incident happened today, if this young man, Rufus Fugit is his name, if a person like him came to see me in his condition, would it be different today for that soldier? In what way?
It would be different in that the VA hospital and the clinician would have access through the Joint Legacy Viewer to view the data that was collected in Germany at the hospital by the military medical provider. That is the capability that we have today. So that VA provider would need to go to a system outside of his or her electronic health record, but they would have access to view it, to see who the doctor was, to be able to find out more information. But to your point, we're not satisfied with that, which is why we're doing what we're doing now, which is MHS Genesis for the DoD, and the Coast Guard and the VA have joined that solution, and we will have exactly the same technical solution where the data resides once. And so if this happens 3-4 years from now, then the data will reside once, and the VA provider will have access to the same exact information the DoD provider has access to.
It's going to be another 3 or 4 years?
It is going to take, again, the deployment is regional across the country and then overseas. And so as we put more and more hospitals onto the new system, MHS Genesis, and the VA does the same on the same timeline, it will be first deployed on the West Coast, then the East, and then the center of the country, and then we'll move outside of the United States.
So a young soldier like Rufus Fugit that comes to me now with the same situation, I've got to say, I'm sorry, it's going to take another 3 or 4 years.
No, again, the access to the data through the Joint Legacy Viewer exists today. Right now, I can go in and see all of the data that was collected on me, whether it was in the DoD, the VA, or in a commercial partner who has a partnership with us. So the data is accessible. The reason that we want to have an integrated system is by having all of the data reside in one place, we can take advantage of clinical decision support. We can be more efficient and know that when a test was done that we have access to all of the test results and we don't have to do that test again. And we can create additional efficiencies and effectiveness across the two departments.
Well, his records in Germany, I assume there was a write-up of his operations in great detail that DOD did. and which VA could not get their hands on.
Correct.
Would that kind of info, the medical records of those operations, would that be available through this system
Yes.
now?
Through the Joint Legacy Viewer, yes. Today.
And the Joint Legacy,
Viewer.
tell me about that.
Sure. So what the Joint Legacy Viewer does is it's a view, and it goes out and it looks at every source of data that there may be a record. And so it'll, again, if we use me as an example, it would look for Stacey A. Cummings and my birth date and my unique identifier, and it would go out to scores of databases and find any data on me, and then it would put it into a view that is shown in widgets. So there would be a widget that said procedures, problems, allergies, prescriptions, any radiology, any lab test results. And so the VA, in your scenario, the VA provider could pull up the Joint Legacy Viewer and look up the gentleman, and he would be able to see the data that is currently stored in the DoD tool called Accentris, and they would be able to see that data and click on it and be able to learn more about the procedure that happened in Germany.
Would that be available to the hospital in Lexington, the VA?
Correct. Today.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you letting me take out of order here. And I thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cummings, I have worked on this issue for so long, and it is really, really frustrating. I'm a former hospital attorney, and you know, hospitals oftentimes, as ours did, had different hospital locations within the corporation, and they shared medical records. So it was seamless. It just baffles me that this can't be done. And there's software, commercial software, medical record software that could simply be purchased by the VA and the Department of Defense, is there not?
And that's exactly what our strategy is. So we've decided that both the DoD and the VA are going to buy the same electronic health record. It's based on Cerner's Millennium, as well as Henry Schein Dentrix Enterprise, which is a dental module. So we are exactly doing what you have asked us to do, which is we're going to have the same system. We are actually going to store all of the data in the same data center, so we're going to protect it. We're going to make sure that there are protections, and we're going to access that data, the same exact data, regardless of if you're a DoD provider, medical provider, or a VA medical provider. So that is our strategy, and we are implementing it. We have contracts in place, both the DoD and the VA, and we're working together from a technical and a programmatic perspective to align our strategies to make sure that the end result is that it is seamless for a patient.
Who from the Department of Defense is coordinating with VA? Who are the people who are involved in making sure that that happens?
So that would be my position, which I've recently moved on to another position within the Department of Defense. But Mr. Bill Tinston, who is my successor, that is his job. And I will say it's actually the job of everyone at this table. So we meet on a regular basis. Mr. McCaffrey, Admiral Bono, the Surgeons General. We have people on our teams or ourselves who meet with the VA on a regular basis.
But you said you're going to start this on the West Coast. It's going to be a regional deployment, East Coast, and then the middle of the country. Why can't you just do this all at once, I guess?
Actually, I think that's the first question I asked when I took this job. We are applying commercial best practices, and so we've talked to large hospital systems to ask them how they did their deployments. And what we learned from them is that doing a subset, refining, and then learning lessons, improving the system, and moving on to the next one is the best model. Now, I will say that clearly we've deployed only to our pilot sites. We're going to gain more and more experience as we move to other sites. And we would always be looking for opportunities to be more efficient and more effective, as well as partnering and being in coordination with the VA.
Well, and if this is a 4-year timeline, there will be updates, countless updates in that interim period before this is all in place. I don't know how you're going to do it.
Well, the beauty of having a centrally hosted system is that we don't have to go out to each hospital and update it. So the Cerner Millennium software actually gets updated on a weekly, monthly, quarterly sometimes even daily basis. And so we always have the most up-to-date software. And so we've already taken 2 major upgrades to the Millennium software in our MHS Genesis deployment. And that's the beauty of a commercial off-the-shelf solution, as you pointed out, that you experienced in your hospital.
So I have a Southern Arizona district. I have the Southern Arizona VA was a wonderful hospital. But if a veteran goes in after just transitioning out of the military this week, needs to refill a prescription, will they have the records from the military in order to do that?
So this week today, the VA medical provider could go into the Joint Legacy Viewer and see what prescriptions that individual has, and then give them a refill of that prescription. What we can't do, if you're asking the question of can the VA simply fill a prescription that the DOD prescribed, no, and I think that there may be medical reasons that I would defer to my medical colleagues about why that might be.
Well, and that's the frustration that I've run into is the veteran then has to see a physician, which takes time. We still have calendaring issues at the VA. In the meantime, without their prescription, or a prescription lapse, which is a healthcare hazard for that veteran. And there's no other way to address that?
To the best of my knowledge, other than the Joint Legacy Viewer, which we have today. Now, in the future, when we have an integrated system, that would simply be a policy issue as opposed to a technology issue. But today, the technology does not exist for the veteran to go into a Veterans Affairs or into a VA hospital and fill a DOD prescription. That technology does not currently exist as an enterprise solution.
I just don't get it. I don't see why not. I mean, but anyway, thank you for your testimony here. We want to work with both the Department of Defense and the VA to solve this problem as quickly as possible. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, and I hate to beat the same horse, but I'm going to. I have a question for you. I came on this committee in 2004. This was an issue in 2004. In fact, you actually used that date yourself. I know that Milcon put $1 billion in it in 2004. I would be willing to bet the ranch they put $1 billion in it every year since 2004, at least $1 billion. I would like to know how much you were in the appropriations bills that DOD received. What was the designated amount for this particular problem that was appropriated every year since 2004? I'd like that information. You should be able to get it for me. I'd appreciate it if you did. If you matched VA, then that would be this is 17, that would be $13 billion invested by VA. And assuming I am right on my hypothesis, $13 billion by DOD, and the result is a viewer. Or else that money went someplace else. Let me finish. Okay? And the viewer doesn't solve the problem. And yet the problem is exactly as the lady described right there in 2004. Now, where did that money go? How was that money spent that was designated to come up with interoperability? And in 13 years, we haven't gotten interoperability. It just blows your mind. I'd like that information from the Department of Defense, and I'm going to get it from the VA because I'm ranking member on that committee. And we need to take a hard look at the amount of money we spent to get, at this time, a viewer that doesn't solve that poor prescription drug problem that was described right over there. Because I've had at least 50 people call me and say, my prescription's expired and I can't get it filled. And so the veterans are constantly complaining about that. So this is beyond belief. Can you get that information for me? Someone? I don't care who it is.
I will take that for the record.
Because I know we designated, I haven't been on this committee that long, for that whole time. But I know the VA, we designated it for that purpose, interoperability, and it didn't get done.
With the Chairman yield.
Yes.
I heard this same conversation 15 years ago between
Exactly.
members and the departments. And yet here we are, having spent zillions of dollars.
Unbelievable.
No one knows how much or where it was spent, assumedly, and we still don't have an answer.
And that's why I want to see the numbers, and I think both committees ought to take a hard look at the numbers and get some explanations. Because as many problems as we have, and many issues we have with our warfighters, which we love, and we try to do the best we can for, this is a embarrassment in the amount of money we poured into this to get to this point. When I've had merchants come into my office over the years and say, I can do it in 6 weeks. And I will call the VA and I'll call DOD, say, I got these people you need to meet with. They'll go to you. Oh, they're already working on it. They don't want to look at our program. So I want you to tell me about the money.
2020.
Show me the money.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like a point of clarification.
Yes, I'll yield.
So you've got the viewer. It's part of a two-step solution. You're running parallel and everything so nobody's medical records get lost. Not happy about the money that's been spent to do this. But if I have a DOD prescription and I go to the VA, the viewer will allow my doc to see what prescription was written, and then the doc can make the assessment. I'm going to write another, 1 week, 30 days, or whatever until I do my full assessment. So it isn't like that prescription's lost and it can't be filled, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I'd like you to share that with me and the chairman, if you don't mind, please. Yield back.
Judge, in answer to your question, assuming anticipated requests for 2020, and that's a dangerous assumption, are approved in total from 2008, and your question was from 4, so there is still a response to the committee, $4,980,615,035. I would simply, because our time is running, I appreciate the members' participation. I share my chairman's. I remember when Chairman Rogers and Ms. Lowy had a meeting, among others, General Shisheki was in that room. So I would, people have used the term frustrated. I would say I'm appalled. And my good friend gave me my prompt. He has heard me say this many times before, and I'm deadly serious. This country fought and won World War II in 4 years. And we have had meetings on this for decades, and the rollout is going to be another 10 years. Since we have probably about 60 minutes until votes start, and we have 13 members here, we will have to move on. But my last comment parenthetically is, why is the Midwest always last?
Here. I'm serious. I am too.
Serious about that. Why is the Midwest part of this country always last?
Because we don't have as many veterans.
Who is first in my heart?
California is first in the nation. But people ask me why I'm cynical about national health insurance, Mr. Chairman. This is it right here. I tell my friends that are supportive of Medicare for all, be careful what you wish for. But just as I listen through this testimony and read through some notes, I know that all of you want to provide for the health and well-being of our service members. To that end, I wanted to get your thoughts on how to link and create interoperability. Obviously, we have a problem with medical records between the VA and the Department of Defense, but also we have interoperability problems between the DHA and the services, and perhaps one of the reasons is because we don't have a command. Right now, I suspect that you don't have a Defense Health Command. You don't have clarity of command. And it seems to me that that would be important, especially in a military setting. If something happens and that we don't want to have happen, and you need to move quickly, wouldn't it be better to have a command than it would be to have the type of situation that you're setting up at the present time? I don't know who's the right person to answer that question, but somebody, please.
So, Congressman Calvert, I'll take the first stab. Actually, the NDAA of 19 has asked the department to ask that question exactly. So we are in the middle of looking at what is it feasible to consider some type of either a Defense Health Command, a Unified Medical Command. It's been a concept that's been debated for several years. We are putting together 3 or 4 options for the department to consider, and then later this year we owe a report to Congress identifying those options, our assessment in terms of feasibility, and making those recommendations for not only the department but for Congress to consider. But in the interim, and my colleagues can chime in and add to this, your issue of interoperability, one of the things that we are trying to do in terms of, where appropriate, standardizing things across the separate military-run healthcare facility networks is indeed on enterprise level, do it in a consolidated way. So, for example, in medical logistics, our goal would be that the same types of medical supplies, devices that are used in our MTFs are the same ones that our providers are using downrange, whether it's Army, Navy, or Air Force, and so that we have an effectiveness not only in our purchasing, but in terms of training, that we're training all of our providers on a common set of tools. So that's an example of one of the things that these reforms would try to get at is facilitate that kind of interoperability.
Well, based upon what we've seen in the beginning of this meeting, I have some real doubts about how this is going to work unless there is some kind of command structure and somebody that's responsible. We've moved a lot since World War II. Real quick, Mr. Chairman, on December 6, 1941, the Department of the Navy bought a large facility on the West Coast, because we're first, to build a hospital that had several thousand beds. It closed escrow on December 6, 1941. And they were up and operating in a week. And a lot's happened since then. I don't know if we can do anything in a week anymore in this country, but we can't get our health records together. We certainly as hell can't fight a substantial war, potentially with one of these near adversaries we talk about, and put together the men, the equipment, and the facilities in a very rapid way, it seems to me. So, with that, thank you.
Yes, first, Mr. McCummings, Ms. McCummings, I'm sorry, and good luck in your new job, Mr. McCaffrey, and generals and admirals, so I can move quickly. First thing, I want to mention the incredible work in going local now in Maryland Shock Trauma and the Kennedy Krieger Institute, both located in Baltimore, and especially in terms of their behavioral health for military families and spinal cord injury research. Now, General West, my question is to you. Primarily directed, the Major Extremity Trauma Research Consortium, called METRIC, you're familiar with METRIC, was created in 2009 and later expanded with funds from the peer review orthopedic research program. METRIC consists of a network of clinical centers and data coordinating center that works with the DoD to conduct clinical research studies on orthopedic trauma. METRIC has made improvements in adapting several technologies to the orthopedic trauma setting, but more work can be done. Additional funding would allow for the integration of electronic medical records into clinical trials, the use of the mobile applications for long-term patient follow-up, and additional statistical support for conducting secondary analysis on clinical trial data. My question, if this program were to receive additional funding, Would allocating towards meeting the technological goals I just mentioned be a wise investment? Does the DoD have plans to continue to provide sufficient funding for a consortium and coordinating center to support clinical research in the area of severe limb injury? And I have one other question for the record, so if you can move pretty quick on this, appreciate it. Did you get all that?
I got it all, sir.
Okay,
and thank you so much for the question, and appreciate the support in that. As you know, the orthopedic injuries and musculoskeletal injuries in general are one of the mechanisms of injury that, given the
dealing with all the time in the
absolutely.
New War, right?
And so any additional resources to provide meaningful research that will lead to products or meaningful in-state type of either lessons learned, apparatus or any type of structure to assist our service members would be greatly appreciated. So I'll take that for record, Congressman, so we can provide the details of what additional funding would provide.
I know an example of that is instead of having hooks, we're able to actually create hands and arms.
Absolutely.
And that's where that program's going. That really makes a difference for our military and also the whole country.
It certainly does. I mean, just recently, the articulated ankle, just to have that more proprioception for individuals to have more normal gaits is one of the research items that you were talking about. So those things of that nature where we have more fine touch and articulation or better articulated prosthetics would be
This question is...
Gentlemen, if you could defer in a second just to make sure, because...
That's okay.
I'll give you this. Don't go anyplace, but at this point, to Ms. Granger.
Thank you.
Thank you. Currently, about 5.8 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease, and it's now the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. We're seeing it in younger and younger people. Your fiscal year funding level for Alzheimer's research is $15 million. And while I know that the National Institutes of Health provide the bulk of the research dollars, $15 million just doesn't seem nearly enough given the number of families suffering. So I don't have a question, I have a statement. I want to see more from the Defense Health Program for Alzheimer's. But my question now is, each year in the hearing, we discuss the importance of suicide prevention. Unfortunately, the suicide rates continue to increase. Reports indicate the active duty military suicide rates reached highs in 2018. I think we have to do everything in our power to reverse this. I would like to ask, I don't know who to ask this, but I would like you to specifically say why do you think those suicide rates are remaining so high? And the important thing, if there was no limit on funding, what would you do to address the epidemic? Thank you.
Congresswoman Granger, I'll start with that one. The why question is very difficult of why the rates are remaining high. The causes of suicide are multifaceted, and so each case is we do a deep dive and kind of an epicon of what happened, and sometimes there's no common thread between all. There are some instances that we can kind of predict certain elements are the same, but most of them do not have a common thread with each individual case. Each case is an individual. What we would do to decrease, I think, more things that we could do is to decrease the stigma, to increase those efforts. We've come a long way in that, in identifying that individuals that need help should feel comfortable in getting help without feeling it's going to impact their careers. And we've made progress in doing that, but we still aren't where we need to go. We started embedding behavioral health far forward. We've, in Army Medicine, have 61 embedded behavioral health units rather than having the individuals having to come to a facility for care. We actually have those down in the unit areas so they feel comfortable going to those individuals rather than waiting or suffering in silence. And we've seen it make a difference. From 2007, when there were about 900,000 visits Army-wide, we're up to over 2 million. And it's not because there's more pathology, it's because people feel more comfortable getting care. Our senior leaders are stressing it. We have very high senior leaders who will say, I've had issues and have gotten help, so you need to do that as well. And so that's allowing individuals to have more more faith in that they can come forward without having any adverse outcome to their careers. But the problem is there are individuals who still believe that if they do mention something, it might impact their ability to remain in the service or to do certain jobs in the service. So I think reducing stigma, ensuring that we have access in multiple venues, which we do, not only within our direct care system. We have the ability for our service members to have, anonymous visits, so they don't feel necessarily tied to, one facility or tied to the facility, but they feel comfortable that they can talk to someone without necessarily having repercussions. Again, with hotlines and services where they can actually get the care.
And if I could just to build on General West's comment about the challenge of kind of knowing what the solution would be to stem this. It's basically a public health crisis in the department, and that is the fact that I think around 40% of those who've committed suicide did not even have a mental health diagnosis, and so it's the challenge of getting to them. And so one of the things that we've been doing with the support of Congress the last several years is how can we increase systematically the touch points where we can get service members to have a mental health assessment as an additional way, as an opportunity to see is something going on that we can flag. And so over the last year, we've added a requirement that every periodic health assessment of a service member includes a mental health assessment. And so we're asking questions that we hope can trigger identification. And the other thing, and Army's really been the lead on this, is we've invested about $100 million with the NIH, and one of the focus areas is what can we do to, are there things that we can identify that are triggers that if you identify, you could then focus on that subpopulation and say, hey, that population needs to have a further examination, and then be able to figure out how do you further assess and evaluate them.
Yes, ma'am. And so suicide prevention is really a community health issue. We need to get everybody involved in stepping in when they identify somebody who might be displaying symptoms to be at risk. So in the Air Force, we have a program for all, some, or few. So we're teaching everybody how to identify what some of the factors are that you could identify somebody that might be at risk for attempting suicide. And then what can you do about it? How do you engage? How do you intervene? And where can you get this person to help? Some people need a little bit more help than just education. And so we've got all kinds of counseling capabilities across the installations, some within the clinic, some outside of the clinic. And then some people, the few, absolutely need mental health treatment. In the Air Force, we have, much like the Army and I'm sure the Navy, embedded mental health specialties into units. That is really helping to decrease some of the stigma where people feel more, members feel more comfortable at that unit level to go and talk to that mental health provider. And if they exceed, if it's more than just coaching at that point in time, then that mental health provider then can get them into the clinic to be seen. We also have embedded mental health providers in the primary care clinics. So no longer does a member have to then make another appointment to get into mental health to get their issue addressed. They can walk across, a primary health care provider identifies a person at risk, and they walk them straight over to the behavioral health person in the primary care clinic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your time, and I was just curious. I guess I'd direct this to Mr. McCaffrey. I'd like to read a quote from Caden Davis. He is serving in the Army National Guard in Palmetto, Florida. As you are probably aware, the National Guard is particularly special to Florida because of their role in disaster relief, among other things. This is his quote. "My service means a great deal to me. I take pride from laying down the widely accepted stereotype that my generation has an inability to exhibit selfless behavior. One of the founding mantras of military service is just that, selfless service. My twin brother, who is currently stationed at Patrick Air Force Base, also in Florida, has equally committed himself to the defense of our country. It is difficult for me to accept that one of us is free to serve his country honorably while the other cannot. When news reached me of President Trump's ban on transgender service, I was dejected and humiliated, to say the least. This assumption that transgender soldiers are unfit to serve is not a personal attack against me, but an assault on the marginalized LGBT populace. The ramifications of this ruling, should it come to pass, would entail stripping capable soldiers of their part in the defense of our country. Caden Davis is transgender. He is just one story of thousands of transgender service members who answered the call, put their lives on the line, and served our country honorably. As the branches continue to miss recruiting goals, what specifically about Caden Davis's service does the administration find unfit?
Mr. Christ, the policy the new policy that will be going into effect on April 12th, it is a result of over a year of study and examination of the department, and it's not focused on transgender individuals, but it is focused on gender dysphoria. So much like other conditions that are either deployment limiting or are disqualifying for accessions, we are treating gender dysphoria in the same way. Right now, those individuals who have made a commitment to access into the military before this policy is in place on April 12th and have met those requirements, if they have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and they have been stable in their preferred gender for 18 months, they would be eligible to be accessed and provided services under the prior policy. The new policy goes in effect again on April 12th, and that policy does have new accession standards, and so you would have to be stable in your gender for 36 months and be willing to serve in your biological sex in order to be accessed. Folks that are current service members that have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria prior to April 12th would be eligible to receive all of the services associated with gender transition under the prior policy.
Can you define gender dysphoria, please?
Yes, it is actually a medical diagnosis that indicates you have an issue with regard to not believing that your biological sex is your true identity. It carries with it, and I'll let clinicians here provide better information, but that it coexists with other issues in terms of distress and angst, anxiety, mental health issues that are caused by this inner conflict, and that is the diagnosis.
And that makes it disqualifying for them to serve?
So it is. It again, the focus is on a condition, and like there are other conditions that affect one's ability to carry on the military responsibilities. There are issues around gender dysphoria, as I mentioned, in terms of mental distress, issues around if your medical treatment plan would require total transition and genital reconstruction, the impact that has in terms of your ability to be deployed. And so those are that's the assessment in terms of why that condition, like other conditions, the evaluation is how does that affect your readiness and your ability to deploy.
So were these conditions being assessed before April 12th?
I'm not sure I understand that question. But
okay. You said that if this goes into effect, it's April 12th, 9 days from today, that this starts.
Correct.
Have these people in this situation, have they been getting assessed prior to April 12th in the military?
Oh, yes. That has been ongoing. Yeah.
So what's new about what's happening April 12th?
Well, on April 12th, there's the policy. We have a change in terms of accessions, and so effective April 12th, if you are seeking to access into the military, and you are...
What's access mean? Joining?
Coming into the military, sorry. And you have gender dysphoria. You've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and you have been stable in your preferred gender for 36 months. You can access as long as you are willing to serve in your biological sex.
And prior to April 12th, you couldn't assess or join?
Hmm?
You actually could, right?
Yeah,
so the
yes.
change is you become ineligible if you're trying to join the military.
If you're trying to join the military, yes, after April 12th.
And who made this determination?
This is the policy of the department.
Who at the department issued the policy?
The deputy secretary issued it on March the 12th.
Okay, then let me wrap up, Mr. Chairman.
And then if you could, before you're done, I'd like you to yield, but please finish.
I'll be more than happy to. The 5 service chiefs have no issue with transgender service members and say it has not affected unit cohesion. For example, Admiral John Richardson said, quote, "By virtue of being a Navy sailor, we treat every one of those Navy sailors regardless with dignity and respect that is warranted by wearing the uniform of the United States Navy. By virtue of that approach, I am not aware of any issues. Why is it that those in charge of leading and deploying transgender service members have no problem, and yet the administration apparently, or the department, does?"
So the policy that is going in effect is a policy that is applied to those that have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. It is not a policy that says individuals that are transgender cannot serve in the military.
And what'd you say again, gender dysphoria is?
Gender dysphoria, why don't you do a better job at defining it clinically?
So clinically, the definition of gender dysphoria is when an individual experiences profound conflict between their gender identified at birth and the gender that they've identified with currently. And so oftentimes with that gender dysphoria, and it's a clinical diagnosis, it occurs in a minority of folks who are transgender members, personnel. There's a range of treatment for that transgender dysphoria that they're experiencing. And so it's a complete range of either counseling, in some cases, depending on their dysphoria, they may require treatment with hormonal therapy, and in some cases, surgical therapy.
I will yield to Ms. McCollum.
So let me ask a question. So a person has gender dysphoria. They have gone through a transition. They've been in transition. It's all completed. Are they ineligible from enlisting? I mean, because part of it I'm hearing from you is that person wouldn't be ready to deploy on a mission notice. So it's either an issue with a person who's been diagnosed with transgender dysphoria, but if they've gone through operations, they're all done. They want to enlist, then that's not an issue of that individual not being eligible to be deployed because they would be going through a medical procedure. So what happens then?
It is a very complex situation. Depending on the type of care that a transgender individual has had to treat their gender dysphoria, if they remain stable after that transition, then there is an opportunity to consider them through waivers and other evaluations whether or not they can be accessed or join the military. One of the challenges with transition and the treatment for transition, if they go on to have complete surgical transition, then by virtue of the surgery itself, because of our existing standards for accessions, they may be disqualifying. So that's part of the challenge with that.
Well, it would seem to me that this is not the black and white issue for many of us as the president has made it. But it also seems to me that if a person has made a decision to go through the operations and want to serve their country and pass a physical and be able to do it, and that should be available, but that should be clearly defined as to what would militarily disqualify them physically if there would be an issue, and what would allow them to join if there isn't an issue. And there are waivers that are made all the time. Is there a written policy on this that someone can follow through and there would not be subjective discrimination?
Yes, we can share with the committee the formal policy that lays out all of the details, both with regard to the new accession standards, how the new policy will apply or not apply to folks, but I'd say grandfathered in terms of prior to April 12th, but we can get that full
But I'm
detail
talking
and
about
policy.
people who want to enlist also, who maybe have gone through the change. So I'd like to get some more information on this. Let me just, for the record, say I don't agree with the administration's decision, but I think there needs to be total clarity so there's not discretionary discrimination. If someone, after having gone through a sex change, would want to serve our country, they should be allowed to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. I am.
Just on process, the new policy takes place April 12th. And the policy was precipitated by a study that was performed.
Correct.
And it changes the existing policy.
Yes.
Which was also precipitated by a study.
Correct.
And I assume there were medical professionals that did both studies.
Yeah, there was a panel of experts, including service line leadership, as well as medical experts that provided input.
For the current policy and for the new policy.
I can't speak to the prior policy, but in terms of developing the policy that is going to be in effect next week, yes, that was a result of a panel of experts.
What do you think changed in that intervening couple of years? If we had two panels of medical experts come to different conclusions, what do you think changed there?
I don't want to speculate, Mr. Chairman. I believe it was having a limited experience under the prior policy and an opportunity, I think, with the focus on then Secretary Mattis's focus on lethality and readiness and how do we maximize deployability, that he directed a lot of changes in policies across the department with that focus, and this was one of them.
I associate myself with my colleagues' remarks in total, and Mr. Diaz-Balart, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to kind of go back a little bit to where we started. And there is obviously bipartisan frustration for the lack of how slow the process has gone as far as going to a one system of electronic records. I want to associate myself with the statements that the ranking member, Mr. Calvert, made regarding this concept. And I don't want to, because I'm not blaming individuals. I think that the concept of government-run healthcare shows that it tends to be slower, more inefficient, over-expensive, and sometimes the quality is also not there. And so, again, careful what you ask for sometimes. But Ms. Cummings, so you mentioned that there are this MHS Genesis, right, is going to be done in phases and in different parts of the country. So let me pose this. So let's assume that there is a person who is now serving in a part of the country where the Genesis program is working, is functioning. It's transferred now to one where the legacy system is. What happens then? What system is that person into, and what happens then? And vice versa, by the way. If they're in a place where the Genesis system is, MHS system is there, and then they get transferred to, or either way, what happens?
So when we deploy MHS Genesis to a new location, we pull over a subset of data and it's procedures, allergies, medication, immunization, and I forgot one of them. It is a set of data that has been identified by the clinical community as important to have at the first interaction that you have with a patient. We do that same thing when a new patient PCSs into the area. So if you were being seen in San Diego and you move to Bremerton, the first time that your doctor and your clinical team sees you, they would pull that subset of data, and the time for how long we pull that data, again, was clinically driven based on the data that's important at the time when you're seeing that person for their medical interaction. So that's how a new MHS Genesis patient's data would be pulled into the system. If you were to go from an MHS Genesis location to a legacy location, then we are using the Joint Legacy Viewer, which is the interoperability tool that we designed for interoperability with the VA. That is actually also our interoperability tool for DoD Legacy and DoD MHS Genesis. So in both MHS Genesis and our legacy systems, there is a link. You click a button that says JLV, and whatever patient you're seeing in the system, all of their data immediately pops up. And you can see all the data, not just from the DoD, but also from the VA and from any commercial providers who we have a partnership with. So like here in the local area, if somebody had been seen at Inova, the data that if they had gone to an emergency room or were seen at Inova, that data would also pop up and be available through the Joint Legacy Viewer.
General West, so there are obviously many, many military families that live in installations in frankly, really remote areas. So how would families who don't have access, or at least easy access to TRICARE, to the TRICARE network, and how would they get off-base care if again they don't have access to the TRICARE system in some area of the country? What access do they have?
Congressman, in the direct care system, we'll take Fort Irwin for an example, which is considered a remote area. We do have a direct care system, a hospital there. It's limited in its subspecialties, so we have to rely on our network. That is kind of what the default is and has been. And we worked with our DHA partners who continually, I don't want to speak for Rocky, but I've experienced they've continually go out and look for additional partners in that specialty area that we need. We see the same thing in Alaska. Sometimes it's hard to do, but they work really hard to try to find those specialty providers. But short of that, I mean, if they're not within the distance and they have to travel farther, the only option is then to ensure that their travel costs are reimbursed. But as far as the options, it's either in the direct care system, what we have at the location, the facility, and we try to make sure that we look operationally to assign providers, if we can't hire in those areas, to assign those critical capabilities at the MTFs. Then we work with the Defense Health Agency to determine what capacities we lack, and they will try to make their TRICARE network more robust in that area.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chairman, one of the things that's interesting, this frustration that we all have, some of you have been dealing with it longer than others. I don't know who you're referring to, Mr. Chairman. This issue of electronic health records is not only an issue that the federal government has had to deal with. Private hospitals, systems about how it would be very interesting to see how some hospital systems, whether it's public or private, who have gone on to electronic records, how long it took them, how much did it cost them, just to compare that with the issue that we're dealing with here. I mean, is this the norm? Is it just that technology is so messed up that that in this area it doesn't work? It would just be very interesting to maybe get executives from healthcare systems, private hospital systems, and I understand that the scale may be different, but because I just don't understand.
Gentlemen, yield just for a second.
Absolutely.
I think that from what I know, Kaiser has been known to have the best medical record system in the country. I don't know if there's any disagreement with that. For the largest provider that's out there that has a system that they put together. So it'd be interesting maybe to talk to them because they have obviously have their act together.
I think it would be, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be, thank you, sir. I think it would be an interesting thing to note. Or have others done it? Is it just impossible to do? Nobody can do it? Or have others done it? Maybe a different scale, maybe, again, some different issues, but at least to get a frame of reference as to what we're dealing with here. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to recognize Ms. McCollum, but just parenthetically would add to the interchange that took place because Mr. Chris' question, this is not directed to the panel at all, but I just saying like we're trying to suck every last ounce of kindness out of society. And we be just kind to people, Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to submit my questions to the record, but I'm going to put on the record what they are. One of the things I would like to have come back to me, and it might be an overall DOD policy, or it might be a policy within the branches of the service. And I know you also work with Coast Guard and others, so I'm including all of them. How the department tracks service members' exposure to harmful chemicals and pollution across their service history. Whether it's the new emerging issue that the Department of Defense is dealing with. It's not a new emerging issue for my constituents, but PFAS in groundwater, whether it is serving in South Korea, dealing with air pollution that comes over from China, whether it's some of the work that that they're working on, whether it's lead in paint, so there still is a lot of asbestos exposure. But then that also comes back to how are we capturing things that can get brought home to service members, family. Asbestosis is something that we know that's sometimes transferable on clothing. Lead can be the same way. And if you're a child and you're with your parents and they're being deployed and it's air pollution, you're exposed to that too. The other thing I would like to understand more, I believe that the DOA and VA apparently held a closed-door symposium last month on burn pits. So hopefully there's some progress being made. Many of us are very frustrated. We have veterans who are frustrated, family members who are frustrated. So I'm wondering if you can share with the committee any conclusions from last month's meeting between agencies and if there's anything that we should be looking at doing as we put our budget forward. Last but least, I'm going to end on a bit of a happy note. There is some therapies out there that we know that are working that engage families and veterans and service members through the creative arts. I've had the opportunity to work and see at the Intrepid Center some of the great work that's going on. I chair the Committee on Interior Environment. We had some veterans groups in support of some of the work that's going on with the NEA. The NEH is also doing things through writing and the great creativity that can happen there. So if you could let us know what we can do, not just funding with the current funding that's being transferred between the NEA and the DOD and the NEH and the DOD, but what do you need in your toolbox? Because there might be new programs that we can bring on, expansive that we can do that. It's not enough money in my budget to do, but we might want to look at the Department of Defense and the VA being part of this. And I want to thank you all for your work, and I know you do the very best you can to keep our servicemen and women and their families healthy. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are for the record.
I'm going to recognize Mr. Calvert, but it has been brought to my attention that the Kaiser system has 12.2 million members in our entirely electronic. DOD and VA have 10.2 million. So don't want to pile on or anything. Ms. Calvert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield part of my time to Mr. Carter. You had a quick question?
I've got a really quick question. Right now, we do drug testing focusing on amphetamine, methamphetamine, marijuana, cocaine, and opioids. But there's a proliferation of synthetic drugs that are out in the marketplace that these kids get their hands on. I just want to know what we're doing as it relates to readiness for testing for these synthetic drugs that new ones pop up literally overnight everywhere. And I want to know, I'd like the service members to tell us what we're doing about those synthetic drugs.
You think we could get that answer submitted for the record and get that to the chair?
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I have a quick question also. Explain the golden hour in terms that we can all understand. How will the provision of medical care be different as we face near-peer adversaries as opposed to counter-insurgencies? How will you get care in denied areas? And what is the plan to address casualties if one of our aircraft carriers were attacked by China, for example? You know, there's a recent speech where a admiral in the Chinese Navy said, we will sink, first thing we'll do is sink 2 aircraft carriers. What sort of planning has been undertaken to address the need for medically evacuate thousands of sailors, for example, in events of such a strike?
Yes, sir, I'll take that. So the golden hour we were able to achieve in Afghanistan, which was from time of injury until time under the care of a damage control surgical team. So we were able to operationalize a network of services and facilities in Afghanistan to allow that to occur. So no matter where a casualty occurred, they were under the care of a damage control surgical team within an hour. We will be challenged, speaking for the Navy, to be able to do that in the expanse of peer competition against adversaries that have the ability to project sea power. So we are addressing that in several different ways. One is increasing the training and surgical casualty care capability of the medical personnel on board ships and with operational units. That's the centerpiece of the whole Corpsman trauma strategy that I spoke about in my opening statement, to allow them to not only resuscitate casualties, but keep those casualties alive until evacuation. The other area that we're focusing on is the concept of moving to the next generation of at-sea care. Right now we have hospital ships. Those are likely not going to meet our needs in the future. We've got to look at taking the medical capability and distributing that out across larger areas, smaller platforms, larger, more robust teams on existing platforms. So that's our strategy within the Navy, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Absolutely. So in the multi-domain battle environment, where we may not have air superiority, that is a concern and issue of how do we make sure that we can enhance prolonged field care. In fact, that's one of the Army's top challenges, is how do we make sure that we have that prolonged care. So it's similar to the Navy. We have the expeditionary combat medic, meaning that we are providing more capability at point of injury. Some of the research initiatives, freeze-dried plasma, things that don't take a lot of logistical support to maintain. So to have that, to be able to reconstitute that and give that at point of injury extends the time that you can manage a patient in an environment if evacuation is not immediate. So those are just some of the things, our research, increased training, and other autonomous evacuation vehicles. I know those are in the future, but there are some prototypes of having unmanned aircraft to go in if there's a non-permissive environment in the future.
Yes, sir. So in the Air Force, very similar. We're increasing our capability of giving trauma level training to not only all of our medics, but even to all of our airmen, so that they can provide care on the ground and save somebody's life. We're also putting damage control capability far forward into the environment, so that our ground surgical teams right now have the capability of performing 10 surgeries without resupply. The other thing that we're looking at is in a denied environment, again, might not have air superiority, so we're looking at planes, trains, and automobiles to evacuate patients out of that area and get them to the next level of care, and also enhancing and increasing our holding capability, where we might not be able to air evac them or move them out of that area as quickly as we would like to, and so we're going to increase our holding capability to maintain life until we can get them out.
Mr. McCafferty, the fiscal year budget 20 justification books see a reduction in realignment of about 16,413 billets, so that we're on the same page definitionally. How would you characterize a billet? What do you mean by that?
It's a position that is authorized and has funding tied to it.
Okay. And my understanding of those almost, I guess by the time we get done, about 18,000, but let's say 16,413, they all will be eliminated in fiscal year 20 under the proposal.
So if I could back up, so the numbers that are in the president's budget for 2020, and in 2020 it's about 14.5 additional, and for 2021 is the 16,000. That's based upon the military departments doing an analysis of what are the medical manpower requirements they need to meet combatant command operational requirements, and that comparing that analysis with the current staffing levels. And so in areas where the current staffing levels were in excess of those operational medical requirements, those positions have been identified to be repurposed by the military departments for other operational readiness priorities. The billets, the 14,500 in 2020, they show all coming off or coming out in 2020. I would characterize that as a budgeting way to show that those billets are going to come out of the medical account, so to speak. Over time, and the departments have, and I'll let my colleagues speak to this in more detail, actually have movement of bodies of people from those billets in terms of the medical billets, have that happen over a periodic transition of about 3 to 4 years through attrition.
Yeah, you have 5 years, and my understanding for 20 is it would be 2,218, according to the documentation we received.
And
in 2020, it is 2,218 of those 16,413.
I'm not clear in terms of. So in the 2020 budget for 2020, it's again a roughly 14,500 positions that are
eliminated.
Yeah.
But the designation, because as far as by attrition. Right. Yeah, those are, yeah. A document I have in front of me says 2,218 go away in 20. But all of them are being eliminated.
All of them
in
are,
20.
yeah, in terms of the medical manpower billets.
2,218 are then why are 2,218 attributed to fiscal year 20?
That I'm not clear why only the 2,000 are attributed to.
Document
yeah, it's the budget documents I have the full 14,000 coming out in 2020.
Here. This says 17,991. So what is that? I got it. All of the billets are going away this year in fiscal year 20.
The billets are off out of the medical account, yes.
Right.
In 2020.
Right.
But
they're not in the medical accounts anymore.
Correct.
Right. Now, that decision as to how many billets could be moved, and my understanding is a fair number of them may not even be filled at this moment.
That is correct.
Others
About
may be, but you're counting on attrition.
Well, about 2,000. I have to go check to make sure I'm giving you accurate numbers, but I believe about 2,000 across the services, 2,000 of those billets are currently unencumbered. So that is, that's part of the equation.
And you said that that's based on recommendations by, I assume, the Surgeon Generals.
By the military departments. So the military departments came up with, again, after analyzing.
When you say military departments, are we talking about these three individuals, or are we talking about somebody different?
Well, when I speak about the military departments, I'm talking about the ultimate leadership of the military department.
Like the Secretary of Defense?
Well, like the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Air Force.
Let me ask a question a different way then, because I'm just not getting any of this at all. Before the decision was made to eliminate 17,991 billets in fiscal year 20 and transfer them to various places on the planet Earth, were the three Surgeon Generals asked their opinion and asked to provide their secretaries with their estimate as to what their needs are?
I would need to defer to the Surgeons General in terms of.
Let me ask the Surgeon Generals. Were you consulted as to what you believed your needs would be in these next 5 years, going per how many billets you would need? I'm just asking, were you consulted?
Sir, as part
and
of
I'm not asking what you told anybody. I'm just saying, were you asked?
Yes, sir. As part of the Army process, I provided my advice to the Army senior leadership based upon their.
And I'm assuming that's true for the other two.
Sir, the department leadership made a change in its planning guidance, and that's what drives our force requirements. That was basically a leadership decision applied across the entire Navy for that.
Were you asked your opinion, Admiral?
For the reductions?
Yeah.
Only insofar as operational planning requirements.
Right. Okay. And Air Force, yes. So then my question would be, I assume these recommendations, opinions as to what the needs would be for the services were delivered to someone making these cosmic decisions. Could I ask, were the number of billets in toto that were recommended to be put at risk was more than 17,991? Was it less? Was it the same? My question would be, is there a difference as to what we're seeing and what I'm just thinking the Surgeon General said they needed?
Well, again, making sure that
Could the committee be supplied with the data as to what the original recommendations were?
The original recommendations from each of the military departments?
I assume that's what I'm asking for, yeah.
I don't see why not.
Okay. The next question I have is as far as the medical personnel are going to be removed at some point in time from some positions. Am I correct in understanding that? They will not be removed until the risks are mitigated, if I'm correct on that. Who makes those determinations as to risk mitigation?
Sir, for the billets that are coming offline in FY20, those positions are not being filled now as they become vacant as people PCS. We're working with our personnel command to identify those that have got critical impact to the fleet and to remote areas and put personnel in those locations even as the billets come offline while we work through this. But there are billets that are coming offline that were not being filled now because people cannot complete a full 3-year tour for a billet that's coming off in FY20.
Another question I would have, Mr. McCaffrey, is the military medical and dental requirements report is classified.
Correct.
Could I ask why?
It is tied to the 721 required the department to identify the military medical manpower requirements to meet a variety of scenarios, including vetted operational plans that are classified, and so the numbers tied to a particular scenario. So we have shared that report to Congress, but we've done so in a way to protect that classification.
I can appreciate the concerns about operations, but it makes it very difficult for the committee to have open conversations and ask others who might be qualified to pass judgment as to whether or not the recommendations are positive or not. Do you have a response to that?
Well, we would be happy to work with the committee in any way
No, but I'm getting your opinion.
Right.
I mean, if I'm looking for somebody else's opinion, does this make any sense? I can't talk to anybody about it. It's classified.
It's classified, but I believe there are procedures by which we could meet with the committee in certain areas, SCIFs, that we could have those kind of conversations.
But we can't talk to other people
Okay.
about it to get another opinion about it. That's what I'm saying.
I see.
And the report was given to us, as I understand it, 2 years late?
That is correct.
Why is that?
Number one, it is, we had a couple of things going on, as Admiral Faison mentioned. We had started to put together the manpower requirements prior to the change in the National Defense Strategy in terms of some of the scenarios that we were planning for. We had each of the services identify, with using their particular methodologies, what their requirements were, having to have that vetted then by the Joint Staff, by agencies within the Office of the Secretary, and what we put forward a couple of weeks ago is that first cut of what we were able to come up with in terms of based upon one particular vetted and approved O plan, as well as another scenario, what the medical manpower requirements were. We have also committed in the report that we recognize we have more work to do. One of the things that the Congress has asked us to do is actually move from separate service specific methodologies to come up with a department-wide kind of common methodology to identify joint requirements, and we're working on that now.
If I could ask one follow-up, and Ms. Kapter's not had a chance, and my colleagues may, are we going to see additional justifications relative to the reductions we're seeing? Do you think that document you sent was adequate after being 2 years late?
The reductions, so the 721 report doesn't speak to reductions. It is just identifying what the medical manpower requirements are right now.
I can't talk about that.
But
I'm looking at numbers here, and I can't talk about it
well,
here.
But the numbers with regard to the reductions that are
some numbers are less than other numbers. I hope I'm not breaking any state secret here. So I'd call it a reduction.
Some numbers are.
Are you going to provide any more justification for the contents and recommendations in that report that was 2 years late?
Yes, we will, because we have committed to that we have more work to do on that report, and we've committed to have that done, I believe, by the end of the summer.
Okay. Ms. Kapter, very briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. I hope others haven't asked these questions. Thank you all for your patriotic service to our country during a most difficult period of time, almost a quarter century at war. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your love of country. My questions, I have two. One related to the cost of pharmaceuticals. And I think, Admiral Bono, you may be the best person to answer this, but I'm not sure. Does the department use a system of negotiated pricing with pharmaceutical companies or competitive bidding in order to arrive at prices for the pharmaceuticals that you procure?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. What we do is we negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies. We do go for the best price for that. We also negotiate for rebates, and this is constantly evaluated as prices change with certain pharmaceuticals.
All right, could I ask you, could you provide us with the list of the 10 most frequently dispensed medications or preparations that you use, whether it's blood supplements or heparin or whatever it is most frequently used, and the cost of that for the last fiscal year and the estimated cost this year, and then the 10 most expensive preparations, whatever those might be. Is that easily accessed through your system?
Yes, ma'am. We could provide that for you.
All right. Would it be the same as the VA? Do you know the
They're
numbers?
Well, it'd be slightly different because our populations are different.
Okay. All right. I note that 71% of pharmaceutical drug market share is controlled by 3 pharmacy benefit managers. Do you know what percentage of drug prices paid by the Defense Health Program is paid to pharmacy benefit managers?
I'd have to take that one for the record, ma'am, to look that one up.
Okay. Do you think that if you used a system of competitive bidding, you would get a better price than negotiated pricing?
I'm open to exploring any ways to get the best price for our medications.
Do you have any? Can you provide us with a chart that shows over a period of time, take 5 years, 10 years, how much the cost of the 10 preparations that I asked for in each category, how the price has gone up?
Yes, ma'am, we can provide
Would
that.
insulin fall into that one of those 2 tables?
Actually, most of our top medications, insulin would not be in the top 10.
All right. Do you know how much you're paying per bag of heparin?
I don't know that right now, but I can get that information for you.
All right. If that is not on the list, could you please provide it?
Yes, ma'am.
Also, on insulin, I'm very interested in that as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Finally, life expectancy for Americans fell again last year because of the opioid and suicide crises and within the U.S. military. 2018 finished with the highest numbers of suicides among active duty personnel in at least 6 years. Those were largely concentrated in the Guard and Reserve. How can access to the quality of mental health care for those in the Guard and Reserve be as excellent as you provide for active duty members at facilities like the Intrepid Center? Is there something we can do through the Uniform Military Health Services to recruit more doctors who will specialize in neuropsychiatric disciplines and behavioral sciences? Is there something we can do through that system? We are 100,000 doctors short across this country. I've asked myself the question, what more could we do? I asked the heads of West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy what they could do to recruit more doctors. They each graduate maybe 5. And I said, why can't we increase that number? And they sort of stepped away from the table. That was a shocking answer to me. So is there anything you can recommend on the Guard and Reserve side? Can we construct Intrepid centers where we have a lot of Guard and Reserve individuals across the country?
So I'll take a stab at this one first, and then for my colleagues who have the Guard and Reserve in their components. One of the things that we're looking at is how we can make the health care benefit more equitable for our Guard and Reserve. So that is one of the things that we're looking at, and that's a more comprehensive look that would also include behavioral health.
Anyone else wish to comment?
A similar answer to that for our Guard and Reserve colleagues. Of course, when they are activated, they have access to the care that we have in our direct care system, our MTFs. But they also receive their care when they're not drilling or activated through a contract healthcare delivery system that manages their readiness and can provide care for that. Or if they have their own insurance, they can see providers within their own area. So it's a little bit more difficult to have a one-size-fits-all program for all of our Guard and Reserve, especially those that vary by state in our Guard population, and then with our Reserve population as well.
I would hope you would look at distance learning and distance treatment as one of the solutions for what we need across the country. I don't want to go over the generous time the chairman has allocated to me, but if someone could send me information on Intrepid centers, how we fund them, how we could fund them. Our part of the country has none, and I was extremely impressed with what I saw when I went over to Walter Reed. Thank you.
Judge Carter? And we've got about
I-
2 minutes.
Question, not going into this the transgender thing, but I had a question, and I asked the Sergeant Major of the Army about the debate was going on, and it was explained to me that the debate was about deployability on the medical issue. Any disease that you contract or that you have, which requires that your health requires you to have some kind of treatment ongoing, keeps you from being deployed. Isn't that right? Isn't that the policy of the military? Like, I don't know what it would be. Diabetes, where you have to have shots every day or something. Then you would not be deployable. Is that correct? Isn't that the issue? Ongoing treatment keeps you from being deployable. Therefore, you're not. That's why the new policy was written, because there have to be hormone treatments that go on after a certain period of time. Therefore, you're not deployable because you got to have those to function normally.
The approach of the new policy does indeed, it builds upon the issue you're raising, and it's ties to a medical condition, whatever the medical condition.
Whatever the medical condition is.
There's, the surgeons can probably speak in more informatively in terms of, what are some of the most common ones, but it's around a particular medical condition and how it affects your deployability, your ability to do a particular job. That is what is reviewed and evaluated to make a determination of, can you serve, or, can you get a waiver, that sort of thing.
That's what I was told, and it wasn't a discrimination issue. It was a deployability issue, really, when it comes down to on anybody that's got anything wrong with them, keeps them from being deployed, then ultimately they're not able to serve in the military.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Diaz-Balart? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.